All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Neil Sanders. His website is Neil Sanders Mind Control. He's written three or four books, but the book we're going to talk about tonight is titled Cambridge Analytica, The Data Deception and the Web of Popularism. And it was just recently published, and I, for one, did not know much about the subject, so I'm delighted that he's agreed to an interview. But he's also written books on mind control and Charles Manson. The titles of his first book, Volume 1 and 2, is Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, Mind Control, Mass Manipulation, and Perception Management. And the Charles Manson book is Now's the Only Thing That's Real, a re-examination of the Manson murders, motives, and mythos. So tonight, again, we're going to talk about Cambridge Analytica. And he's going to follow up with some of his thoughts about the recent election of Boris Johnson. But Neil Sanders, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not know your name, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in this subject matter of Cambridge Analytica?
Sorry, excuse me. Well, I'm primarily interested in mind control. And the thing that got me into it really was, strangely, the Manchurian Candidate film. It was forced upon me by an older friend of mine who insisted that I sit down, and I was like, "Oh crikey, it's black and white, and it's got Frank Sinatra and Angela Lansbury, and this is of no interest to me." But it transpired that it was fantastic, and it just sort of opened me up to sort of various concepts. And basically, at the time, I was learning about psychology at university, and some of the sort of premises, the concept of splitting minds, different bits of the mind, the way that indoctrination works in a sort of cult sense or an advertising sense, which is essentially the same principle, that all sort of clicked with me. And from then on, I got a bit more interested in it. And I didn't really even realise that sort of thing was a thing, to be quite honest. I've been interested in JFK and Loch Ness Monster and, anything that was a little bit out of the ordinary. But then this concept that you could control somebody using, a number of techniques, hypnosis or drugs or some sort of machinery or various other different technological things that could be done to people. And it just appealed to me. I started sort of having a bit of a dig around. And I was surprised to see that a huge amount of material about it is actually in the public domain. It's it's not very widely known, and you have to sort of know what you're looking for and where to look. But there's quite a lot of declassified documents from various entities connected to American and British governments that admit to various experiments trying to control people. Trying to control people on a sort of personal level, trying to sort of extract information from them in interrogation scenarios and that type of thing. And the other thing that sort of interested me was the bleed over between media production, which I was also looking at, and psychology. And in order to sort of do effective media work, it's good to have a basic understanding of various sort of, psychological understandings. And, for example, really basic things to do with colour and shape and the angle of shots and stuff like that can affect you in a subconscious way that you might not actually at first realise. And then the sort of middle ground between these two sort of things is advertising, which heavily plays on both cinematic and psychological techniques in order to manipulate the public. And all of that sort of stuff is just fascinating to me. The ways and means that the efforts that go into trying to trick people and trying to convince people that things aren't as they might appear, or something like that.
And so that kind of does play into your most recent book, because Cambridge Analytica kind of is, I think, one of the interesting words that's used when discussing Cambridge Analytica is that what's the word? It's non-admissive. You're not supposed to know that they're actually pumping propaganda. So for the audience that doesn't know Cambridge Analytica, can you talk a little bit about that and how you became interested in it?
Sure. Well, what Cambridge Analytica advertises itself as is an election management agency, and its slogan is, or was, because it broke up in a very suspicious circumstance, is data-driven behaviour change. And they do a number of things. the simplest way of explaining what they do is they will do a campaign, a media campaign for your candidate in an election, and they promise that they can get people elected. In fact, they boast on having they don't call it overthrown or overturned, but essentially that's what they've done. The elections in countries all over Europe, America, the UK, lots of countries in South America and Africa, for the highest bidder. And one of the sort of things that you'll find is that these sort of countries that they tend to be helping the election campaign for, they're installing people who just so happen to have a favourable foreign policy on minerals or oil or something like that,
right,
that helps either the UK or the USA. So what they will do is there's a number of things. I mean, in basic terms, what they were caught out doing would be sort of would be considered old-fashioned espionage type tricks, whereby they would set up a honey trap and discredit one candidate. Say we don't like this guy, John Frank or whatever, so we're going to pay for a load of Ukrainian girls to basically go to John Frank's hotel room at 3 a.m. and throw themselves at him, and unbeknownst to him, we've got the room wired for sound. Or what they'd do is they go, we're going to offer John Frank a huge amount of money from a shell corporation that doesn't really exist, and we're going to offer him a contract with this so that he entertains it and it goes along to a meeting, and then we're going to reveal that this company's got ties to white supremacists or slave labor or something embarrassing that's going to basically, upend this particular candidate's chances. When they weren't successful or weren't able to do that, they would basically do far more subtle things, which is called micro-targeting, and this is to do with information warfare. It's really the sort of tried and tested sort of campaigning. It's sending propaganda that is positive to their candidate and negative to the candidate they don't feel, but it's done in a very, very specific way. Now, it's nothing more really on the surface than having a poster that says so-and-so is for this or so-and-so is against this or whatever. But it's far more insidious than that, because essentially this company is a weapon. And this is one of the things that I discovered relatively early on, because this was used in a campaign. Well, it was used in several campaigns. It's a weapon of MI5. It's considered, or a weapon of the British government. It's on export control from the British government and has a List X clearance, which means that it's able to hold secret government files, top secret and above, on its premises, which means that essentially it is an arm of the government.
Yeah, it's like a quasi-governmental arm.
Yeah, it's kind of like Stratfor or something like that, right. Basically. Now, this means that basically it can't be deployed without the say-so of certain members of the British government and British intelligence, and that basically its communication tactics or its methodology is considered a weapon of the British government. So it is a foreign policy weapon.
Right. But it's also indicative of its potency as well, as if it's a weapon.
Yeah. Precisely. And its board members are filled with privy councillors and Tory lords and ex-US Marines and Pentagon advisors and military intelligence, and it's a right cavalcade of military industrial complex and the elites of both the UK and America, specifically quite right-wing people. It was run by an ex-MI5 spy called Nigel Oakes and a gentleman called Robert Mercer, who was also behind the financing of Breitbart, although we'll come on to that. He bought into it into 2014 in order to use their psychological warfare manipulation program. What is that? Well, basically what they did was they stole all your data. They went on Facebook and they went on Twitter and they went on Instagram and they went on your private emails and they went on all these different things, and they just stole data about you and loaded it into their algorithm machine and built a profile about you. Like Alexander Nix boasted that they had over 5,000 data points for every single American of voting age in America at the time. That's hundreds of millions of people. Now, basically, how does this work? Well, let's say that I want to make you scared and I know nothing about you. right? Well, let's say I know 5,000 things about you. One of those things is that you don't like spiders, and another thing is that you don't like the dark. Well, I know that if I can get you in the dark and make you think there's a spider, you're going to be scared. Knowledge is power, and you can utilize this to basically manipulate people. Once they stole your data, they basically bombarded you with two things. One, micro-targeted stories and adverts that spoke to you about a certain issue in a certain way, specifically to push your buttons, either to make you very angry or to make you very scared. And then this would direct you towards certain other media outlets and certain other political affiliations. And basically, it was used in the UK to promote Vote Leave and Leave.eu, which was the campaign to leave the EU. And so it bombarded people with basically what turned out to be lies. The entire campaign was foisted around things like, we'll take back control of our laws, we'll take back control of our borders, we'll take back control of the fisheries around the UK, and I forget what the other ones were. Oh, we'll control immigration. And the silly thing was that basically we already had control over all of these things. These were completely misnomer policies. We do control our borders, we do control our money, we do control our laws, we do control the immigration. It's nothing to do with the EU. But basically that was put forward as, we've got to leave this tyrannical, bureaucratical monster that wants to do this and wants to do this and wants to force people into the euro. And none of this was true. The entire campaign was based on lies, basically, and told using a very Orwellian phrase, which was take back control. Now, where were they getting these fabulous phrases, these zingers that really sort of connected with people on a sort of subconscious level, that really sort of resonated with people and made people want to vote in a particular way? Well, what they were doing was they were taking your information. When they were finding people that they felt fitted their algorithm particularly, they would send you quizzes. Now, these quizzes that you've been doing online, you know, what person are you? What friend's character are you? There were literally things like that. There were particular questions that were designed in that to find out which was the most useful slogan that would work for you and so resonate with you. The ones that they found were in England. It's not officially said, but take back control is very, very much like the ones: drain the swamp, build the wall, right, lock her up. All the things that Trump was saying. And the concept of the deep state trying to overthrow the leader. Those were all designed as early as 2014 by Cambridge Analytica, and those were slogans that have been manufactured by this British intelligence and Pentagon connected entity that just so happens to be owned by a load of right-wing millionaires and billionaires and stuff like that.
Right.
Connected.
But it's remarkable, but Cambridge Analytica has only been around since 2013, so it's a fairly new organization. Nigel
Well, it came out of SCL, which was the prior sort of organisation, which has been going for many years. And SCL has, been very, very sort of, they've been overthrowing Nigeria, oil-rich Nigeria, and they were involved. It was SCL that was behind the colour revolution in the Ukraine and the overthrow of various people in South America, whose specific names escape me at the minute. Also, Cambridge Analytica were behind the ascension of Bolsonaro and the ascension of Modi in India, and then later they were hired for the Trump campaign.
Right, so they're working internationally with the same kind of approach of massive data mining, but also specific, very sophisticated micro-targeting of people. Like, so in the U.S., if you were in Utah, you get one type of approach to manipulate a emotional response with a directed answer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put it this way. Basically, like, say if you think that drugs is a criminal offence, that anyone who's on drugs should be locked up, then you're going to get a load of adverts and a load of sock puppet accounts, which are basically fake people talking to you and telling you exactly the same thing, and telling you stories where that didn't happen, and telling you about a little girl that got killed because of a drug addict, and all of these really manipulative fake stories in order to wind you up. Now, if you felt that it was a humanitarian type problem that people should be, put in rehab, then you'd get people talking to you about that. that and telling you Hillary Clinton doesn't want to put people in rehab, she wants to throw people in jail. None of it was true. It really, really didn't matter. And I was just using that as an example. They would just bombard you with anything that they felt would wind you up. A lot of it was basically to do with immigration. They were telling you that, particularly in America, they were telling you that France and Germany had fallen to Sharia law, or that Sweden was the rape capital of Europe, or that there was a 13-year-old girl that was raped in Sweden and the person was let off because they didn't want to offend Muslims, or that what was the other ones? That Germany had acquiesced to Sharia law and allowed child marriages, or that Hillary Clinton had personally been discovered paying ISIS money, or that Julian Assange had said certain things connecting her to ISIS. All of these things were manufactured stories by Cambridge Analytica. I'm not a fan of Hillary Clinton by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that basically they were on the Trump campaign, right. So they were the ones that spread this story about her having Kuru, which is a cannibalism disease,
which is still being bandied about. It's still being thrown around that she still has Kuru. So that propaganda has some lasting effect.
You know, all you need to do is put something on the internet, and then it's on the internet. People don't tend to check sources a lot of the time if it supports their notion, and also certain things. You only need to repeat something 3 or 4 times before something becomes a truism. So, like, for example, there's a lot of people that think, say, as you were saying, that Jeremy Corbyn at the minute is a communist or something like that. He's not a communist. That'd be ridiculous. Like, but you throw enough mud sticks, and it will be. Now, how did they manage to do this as well? Well, essentially because they set up an entire node of what purported to be alternative media, and this was based around Breitbart. Basically, Breitbart, people don't seem to notice, but Robert Mercer, who's the billionaire who's behind AI Technologies and Renaissance Technologies, and he's a hedge fund manager, he and the Koch brothers, Koch Industries, paid into Breitbart. They run Breitbart, and they're running it with the help of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon helped them basically legally launder money through an investment agency called GIA. Now, this is a bit of a side note, but basically just prior to that, Steve Bannon had been working with 2 paedophiles, Brock Pierce and Mark Collins Rector.
Then there was Digital Entertainment Network, rumored to be fully set up for the sole purpose of raping young boys. That's all.
Yeah, quite. I mean, it was very interesting as well that when Milo Yiannopoulos was saying that he's been on boat parties. Well, that's curious because at the time he was financed by Steve Bannon and Robert Mercer. They knew Mark Collins Rector and Brock Pierce, and Mark Collins Rector and Brock Pierce were known to have boat parties where young boys were raped, and Bryan Singer was supposedly there.
Yeah, so Singer's around. Get this. No, it gets even better because Singer was also known to attend parties at Epstein's Island. So he's around in all these same networks that haven't. And then Steve Bannon was, I think, just seen in France last year at Epstein's palatial apartment. I think
it would not surprise me.
No, it is. No, it's really true. And get this. I mean, Bannon, he's like the one who's overseeing a lot of these data mining things, and he's also. Yes. I mean, it gets worse. Like Ed Opperman's done a report on him about a porn and meth house, allegedly that there were the residues of methamphetamine production in a place that he was living, which is kind of very specific. You have to do certain things to create meth. But Bannon is an interesting guy. I mean, in all these guys, it's interesting. Mercer was a name that was bandied about, but he's financing many people in the what could be called the alt-right or the new right that are very popular. Loomer, Shapiro, these guys are all getting checks out of Mercer's fund.
And not just from them, from the Koch brothers as well. It's that's essentially what it is. What's happened is that these billionaires have combined this sort of online campaign with a series of media nodes that on the surface appear to be alternative and to be anti-establishment.
And independent, right. They look independent, right, sorry.
And this is Turning Point UK and like Candice Owens and Charlie Kirk and Richard Spencer's financed by the Regnery family, as Dinesh D'Souza is financed by the Regnery family, and who else is there? Dave Rubin's financed by the Koch brothers. Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, they're all financed by the Koch brothers. The Daily Caller's financed by the Koch brothers. Rebel Media's financed by the Mercers and the Koch brothers. Glenn Beck's financed by the Koch brothers. PragerU's financed by the Koch brothers and the Wilkes brothers. The Wilkes brothers are fracking magnates. Now, the thing that connects all of these people, all of these very, very wealthy people, is that they also all happen to be part of two think tanks. One is the Heritage Foundation, and the other is the Council for National Policy. And these are very sort of right-leaning Christian evangelical foundations, founded in the 70s, and then the Council of National Policy was founded in the 80s. And there's certain people that you might recognise, like, for example, Steve Bannon, Mike Pence, Kellyanne Conway. These are all members of the Heritage Foundation. The Mercers are members of the Heritage Foundation. Steve Bannon is CNP and Heritage Foundation. What did the Heritage Foundation like to do? They like to privatise things, essentially. You know, they like small government, which basically on the surface sounds really, really good, but it's not. It means no oversight and no regulation of their industry, essentially.
Right.
And,
privatization, right.
Reduction of workers' rights and that type of thing. They're connected to ALEC and the Mont Pelerin Society and all these basically large petrochemical industrial families. You know, it's also connected to the Coors family and people like that. So what have they done in America? Well, let me just go through this list. It's a little bit indulgent, but let me just do this list because it's basically like Cambridge Analytica, for example, which was the thing that was vital for the election of for the Brexit referendum and for the election of Trump in America, is run by the Mercers, who are Heritage Foundation, and Steve Bannon, who's Heritage Foundation. Now, the Heritage Foundation produces this document every year called the Mandate for Leadership, and in that they have policy recommendations. Now, basically, they're a lobbying group, and they have huge influence through the CNP, through Doug Cohen, the family, through Billy Graham, through Jim Dobson, and various doministic Christian organisations, and the National Prayer Breakfast and such like this. They have an incredible influence over politics, and basically they say, if you don't do these policies, you don't get our money and you don't get our patronage. Now, how influential are these people? Well, I'll put it in this way. Rudy Giuliani wanted to run for the president of the United States in 2008, and the Heritage Foundation turned around and said, no, we don't like him. He's too pro-gay, he's too pro-abortion, he's too frankly weird. He dresses up in women's clothing, and he used to be married to his second cousin. We're not having that. Also, he's not a born-again Christian, so they weren't very keen on that aspect of it. And so they said, if you don't get rid of him, we will destroy the Republican Party by putting an independent through. Now, in the end, basically, the only candidate that could come through was John McCain, who they didn't really like. But what they did like was Sarah Palin, because Sarah Palin is connected to the CNP and to a church in Alaska, I forget, that is also connected to the Heritage Foundation. They have very, very similar ideologies. And so they said, OK, John McCain can be the candidate if he takes Sarah Palin on as the vice president. So essentially, they dictate the policies. The Reagan era, 60-odd% of the mandate for leadership was immediately adopted directly into policy by the Reagan administration at the behest of the Heritage Foundation. So these think tanks, basically, they set policy. They run the world, essentially. This is the deep state that people are talking about, because, as you'll find out, they have also connections to the British intelligence and American intelligence.
Right. Sorry to interrupt, but you used a great term in your book. It was the cocktopus, not octopus, but the cocktopus. Sorry.
Well, quite. I mean, this is the whole point. They spread out on all these places where people don't think that they're being manipulated. For example, I was having this conversation with somebody online who said, oh, I don't buy this Cambridge Analytica stuff. There's no way that I could be manipulated by big business. And I looked on his Facebook page, and he's spreading Turning Point USA and Turning Point UK memes. Turning Point UK is owned by the Koch brothers. It's financed exclusively by the Koch Industries to be a propaganda mouth for Koch Industries. It's just disguised as an independent journalistic network. So if you're spreading anything that's to do with Turning Point UK, you're spreading Koch Industries propaganda. Why was that particular gentleman spreading Koch Industries propaganda? Because it resonated with him. Why did it resonate with him? Because it made him angry. How did they know it was going to make him angry? Because they were spying on him. They stole his data. They ran it through Cambridge Analytica, and they went, yeah, this will be effective. Right. This will make this person angry.
So they can put the right triangular piece right into the triangular hole, right? So they know the right tool to place in. And it's pretty remarkable, too, that all this stuff is going on, this data. And you had a quote in your book about Bannon, who told an interviewer, he says, you do realize none of this is true, right? So some of the stuff, the propaganda. Some of the stuff propaganda, like he knows. And he actually got started, like he's promoting himself as a, quote, documentary filmmaker. But if you watch his documentaries, they're very similar, if not overlapping or similar than the same kind of propaganda that Cambridge Analytica promoted, yes.
Well, he used to call himself the Leni Riefenstahl of the Republican Party, although he perhaps did that just to wind people up, in which case it is quite funny. But yeah, all of his films were produced by Robert Mercer. And that's the point, basically. They're involved in what is called a culture war, and so they don't mind lying. I mean, Breitbart, for example, has been actually caught out a couple of times. I mean, obviously it's very opinionistic and it's often, nonsense. But it's actually been caught out and taken to court, I believe, a couple of times. Essentially, it was sticking up for Roy Moore, and it was slandering the people who had accused Roy Moore of being a paedophile. So if those people were telling the truth, which it appears that they were, Breitbart, another example of them sticking up for paedophiles as well. Like, the inclusion of Roger Stone, who basically invented lobbying with Manafort, Black and Stone, and was incredibly close to Roy Cohn, who used to be very close to young boys. Now, Roger Stone defended young Roy Cohn by saying he's not gay, he just has sex with men.
Right.
Which is an interesting way to look at it. But anyway.
It's a good spin, too. It's a good spin. It could be men, but he didn't note the age, right?
But these, again, it's all this sleaze and just like these are not good people and that are circling around it. But just to give you an idea of the influence of say, the Heritage Foundation, Cambridge Analytica was run by the Mercers and Steve Bannon, who are Heritage Foundation. The whole point, basically, in my mind, is to put the UK in a position whereby it's got no trading partners and it's over a barrel and it has to trade with America, and it will be traded with America in very, very rough terms because at the behest of the Heritage Foundation and the CNP. How do I know this, or why do I suspect this? Well, the Thatcher government based its policies on the Heritage Foundation's recommendations to privatise British industry as part of the Reaganomics drive and the special relationship that existed between Thatcher and Reagan. And so the behest of the Heritage Foundation, British Aerospace, Cable and Wireless, Amersham International, National Freight, Brit Oil, Associated British Ports, Enterprise Oil, Jaguar, British Telecommunications, British Shipbuilders, British Gas, British Airways, Rolls-Royce, BAE, British Steel, Water, British Electricity, they're all privatised by the Thatcher government. And she also was going to privatise the NHS at the request of another Koch brothers owned industry called the Adam Smith Institute, but she was backed off of this because this would have been like political suicide for her at the time. Although she did try again, and it was again sort of rebuffed. And then a year later in 1983, she introduced the Griffiths Bill, which basically introduced middle managers into the National Health Service rather than physicians making decisions. And this is the sort of slippery slope towards the privatization that America wants to introduce basically now. Wilbur Ross, the Chamber of Commerce, Woody Johnson, the UK ambassador, and Donald Trump have all said basically, yeah, we want to get in there and we want to basically get our pharmaceutical companies in the NHS, which would go against the point of having the nationalised health service. It would basically make it far more expensive for UK citizens. But as we said, the entire Reagan doctrine was based on recommendations from the Heritage Foundation. Here's one: Obamacare was based on recommendations from the Heritage Foundation. The Clinton policy of removing people from welfare, or PRWRA, was Heritage Foundation policy. And I think you've noticed that Trump is going to start taking lots of people off food stamps soon as well.
Correct.
Now, basically, the Heritage Foundation runs, as I said, the Adam Smith Institute, the IEA, or the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Turning Point UK, and the Institute of Free Trade. And again, these are all think tanks set up in the UK. It's basically just extensions of the Heritage Foundation. They have been really, really pro-Conservative Party. They're very, very pro-Brexit. And what they want to do is they want to privatise the NHS, and they're not even shy about this. They have an essay on their website that's called "What is the best way to abolish the NHS?" And loads of British Conservative politicians like David Davis, Boris Johnson, who's the current Prime Minister, Daniel Hannan, Liam Fox, Michael Gove, Jacob Rees-Mogg, they're all under the wing of these specific think tanks. And these were all the arch Brexiteers. So with a bit of hindsight, it becomes clear that everything that they promised you with Brexit was just nonsense. They never were going to deliver that. All they want to do is put us in a position where we can do this trade deal with America, and we'll be begging for it because we won't have any other options, and therefore we'll be able to put up with very, very poor standards because that's what America wants to do. America wants to make a profitable trade deal, and it wants to win. And we're on a barrel, and we've got nothing to trade with you. And basically, so Turning Point UK was sort of introduced a couple of years ago. Turning Point USA, we've already discussed it, financed by the Koch brothers. So Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk and anybody that appears on there is a shill for big business. Betsy DeVos also helps finance the Turning Point, and she's the brother of Eric Prince, who's the mercenary Blackwater Army owner, she's the current health education secretary in America.
Right, so she's running the health. I think that she's the Amway heir, right?
That's it. There's a theme of people involved in American politics at the minute that you're going to see shortly.
Right. So right, but you make an interesting point in the book, or it's a theme of the book, that they're saying they're populist, but you peek under the rock and it's a billionaire. Oh, there's another billionaire. Oh, there's another, because DeVos is a billionaire.
Yeah. Well, quite. Okay. So yeah, basically, the Cambridge Analytica has also been deployed to help people in Italy. Salvini, to help people in the Ukraine, to help people in Holland, Geert Wilders, and they utilise Gatestone Media as well, which is owned by Nina Rosenwald and also financed by the Koch brothers and the Mercers. And this is a media outlet and an institute that basically is spreading this propaganda. So all these films about Islam and stuff like that, they're all being spread by the same people, and they're helping out, as I say, Salvini and Geert Wilders, Marianne Le Pen, and all the names have escaped me now. Alice Waddell and Nigel Farage of the Brexit Party, and various of the basically all of the right wing people across the globe that have all of a sudden sort of risen up, and you'll notice again all of these people are promoted by Breitbart and the Daily Caller, and then all the idiots on YouTube and stuff like that, because they think they're being anti-establishment. They're not.
Right.
All of these people. There's two things that you can tell that these people are shows. One, not a single one of them ever talks about what makes America or makes UK or Italy or Germany or Holland or Brazil or India or any of these places great. They just talk to you about the jingoism of what could be taken away from you, and they use a palingenic ultranationalism, basically harkening back to this concept of a wonderful time just a few years ago that never really existed, okay, and use that nostalgia and fear of things being taken away from you in order to basically to make you comply to what they're telling you. The second thing is that every single one of them is the same message. Every single one of them is the same finances. Every single one of them is the same media outlets, and every single one of them is promoted by the same group of people. So this isn't independent. None of them are independent. They're all using the same trick. It's just been deployed in about 28 different countries, basically. And they're all going out there and telling you the same things that you want to hear or that you don't want to hear. That basically, it's essentially what they're telling you is brown people are coming to take away your culture. And the only thing that you can do is vote for them.
Vote for the right person, right? Interesting.
It's surprisingly effective. Like, it seems to be working, to be quite honest.
Or the communists. I mean, it seemed to be that way, like the fighting the left in Brazil. But both Brazil, I think it was Brazil and India, their legal groups or the state legal groups actually investigated Cambridge Analytica for their data thefts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Italy did as well. It's just that basically what happened was there was a cover-up, which also is an indication that this is a government intelligence operation. Like, several things happened. One, during the actual campaign, it was discovered that Cambridge Analytica was specifically targeting and directing people towards far-right groups. So if you had any sort of inclination of being a far-right person, they would try and get you to vote. So, for example, we've seen a massive resurgence of the far-right in America and in the UK and in Europe, and all of these things have been swelled up by billionaires. Like, basically, the far-right voted because Cambridge Analytica told them to go out and vote. And now this was discovered by the BBC, and it would have been a massive, massive scandal, except a chap called Robbie Gibb decided that basically he wasn't going to expose the scandal. He was going to keep it under hush for Aaron Banks, who was the leader of Leave.eu, which was one of the Leave campaigns, who was his mate. Now, shortly after he resigned from the BBC, he got given a job in Theresa May's Conservative government. Theresa May was the Conservative Prime Minister at the time. And then Theresa May, for some reason, halted all investigations into Cambridge Analytica, Aaron Banks, and Cambridge Analytica's funding.
Wow,
Furthermore, when it was basically discovered that they were hiding data, they did two things. They moved all the data over to Canada, or they stored the data in Canada anyway, which meant that it was out of the jurisdiction of the UK police force. And basically, the police accidentally put the wrong date on the warrant, and so gave them a week in which time literally Cambridge Analytica stripped their entire office out and destroyed all their computer servers and shipped any computers and any data and any documentation away to destinations unknown.
Incredible. It's absolutely
incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
It's absolutely incredible, because then the other kicker is that they changed their name. So Cambridge Analytica as an entity is now Enerdata. So like any kind of fly-by-night operation, they change their name. They do the same thing, but they change the entity name every 4 or 5 years to just throw people off. So.
Well, that would seem to be what it is every time they basically get caught. And they also seem to... they've got non-disclosure act agreements and stuff like that with employees, and because they're dealing with very, very dodgy stuff. And like recently, the Brexit Party, which is a party that exists in England solely to promote the concept of Brexit, which, as we've discussed, will basically benefit these American think tanks and their business partners. And she worked for Cambridge Analytica for several years. Initially denied it, then was caught out on tape admitting it. And this is the point. It's the same sort of thing, the same thing over and over again. So basically, for example, the rise of sort of nationalism again. So the Unite the Right rally in America was organised by Jason Kessler and Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer is financed by William Regney II. William Regney II has got very, very similar views to Robert Mercer. They're basically the far right. They yearn for an all-white America. They've actually said this. And so this is why they're promoting this alt-right and alt-light and stuff, because it's an indoctrination, slowly getting that whole sort of concept again. And you might start looking at things by David Duke, and then you might start looking at things like on certain Reddit polls or whatever. And it all sort of leads you in a particular direction. Now, the Unite the Right, William Roseney also finds this, the Charles Martel Society, the National Policy Institute, which is where Richard Spencer works. Richard Spencer is the person who got punched, who claims to have invented the phrase alt-right and did the Hail Trump thing.
Right. Did you hear his recent leaked audio?
Yes.
It was, I mean,
it's delightful to see. Well, here's the thing, right?
But that's like an insight. It's an insight into his real character, in my opinion.
Oh, totally, absolutely. But it's an insight into that entire scene, because basically at one point you did have this sort of united front of people like Breitbart and Milo and PragerU and, Dave Rubin and Steve Bannon, and to an extent InfoWars and various other people got on this bandwagon and were basically promoting what was far-right propaganda, far-right big business propaganda. And it was a very, very tenuous sort of thing. You've got Ben Shapiro there, who's also financed by the Wilks brothers and people like that. And they're all sort of basically promoting the same message. Candace Owens, Laura Loomer, Lawrence Southern. But they're very fragile people, these people. So they don't actually agree on everything. But they sort of had this, they were forced together in this sort of conglomerate that was sort of there to do a job, which was, what, unbeknownst to them, the job of these American think tanks, basically. And so to watch them all sort of disintegrate on each other and start basically exposing how catty they all are is quite funny, really.
It really is. But I think they were fairly united before Trump got elected, and then they fell back apart. Yeah, so.
Well, basically, this is the problem. They're vying for attention now, because they're all told you're going to be a superstar of this thing. And, that's the other thing. It's quite seductive being edgy and far right and, for the lulz and all that. Right. And, this is free speech and stuff like that, because it basically makes you feel powerful, you're empowered.
Yeah, but they're also getting paid, man. They're getting paid real money. Laura Loomer, the rumor is, Laura Loomer's picking up a $7,000 check, a month. That's...
I wouldn't be at all surprised, and that's even before you get into their sort of Patreons and things, because again, this whole thing was whipped up to be a culture war, an anti-establishment culture war. And the sad thing is, when you look at who's financing it, there's no physical way that it can be anti-establishment. That's the galling thing of it. All this popularist, nationalist fight against the deep state. It's a con by the deep state.
But get this. So they're getting money from Patreon or Subscribestar as like a populist, I'm crowdfunded. But those crowdfunders never see their other payments that come in by check, right? So, that's the whole thing, is that a lot of people didn't know some of these guys were getting big fat checks from billionaires.
Yeah. Well, this is the entire point, because they've got to appear to be independent in the same way that Donald Trump has got to appear to be not in the pocket of the CIA and not in the pocket of big business, which again can't be true. I mean, just to go give some of the ideas, like the first thing that he did was he helped ALEC roll back the environmental protections and the Dakota Pipeline, which was a big thing in the alternative community. We were fighting against that right up until the second, where Trump said, no, we're doing that. We're doing that because my mates, the Koch brothers, they basically own that, and they're going to make a huge amount of money from it. And then what did he do? He gave a 25% tax cut for big business, and that was a Heritage Foundation policy taken directly from the Mandate for Leadership. He then rolled back workers' rights. Guess where that came from? That's right, Mandate for Leadership, Heritage Foundation. Then he attempted a coup in Venezuela. Right. And this was part of the Heritage Foundation's policy to install a US-friendly ruler who would give his OPEC vote to the USA. We mentioned earlier that Bolsonaro was installed by Cambridge Analytica. The very first thing that he did was give he gave the oil that's in Brazil to America. That's really basically what he did, and then rolled back workers' rights and stuff like that, and started hacking away at the
Amazon,
the Brazilian rainforest.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Venezuela too has the largest oil reserves outside, I think, of Saudi Arabia. So there's an immense interest. Yes.
Yeah. And so, essentially what it is, if you control Brazil and you control Venezuela, then you have a controlling interest in OPEC, which would mean that you could surreptitiously set world oil prices.
Right.
And if you can set world oil prices, wow, that's incredible power, isn't it, basically?
It's mega power. And it was interesting, you mentioned this network I didn't know, the Atlas network that was in Venezuela. I mean, this is just another sign of this huge network of think tanks that are all over the planet, just pumping out pumping out propaganda, if you will.
Well, exactly, and they would, and yeah, just to sort of slightly expand on that, what they do is they exist again. They're think tanks that exist to promote business interests that are pro-American, and also to sort of start and or stop grassroots activism in a particular direction. It's astroturfing, essentially. Do you know what I mean? It's like fake activism that will take people in a certain way. And the other suspicious thing about the Atlas Network is it's financed through NIC and NED, the National Endowment Fund, and Americ as well, and all of these are basically they're essentially the CIA slush funds. Like, so all of this is involved in American foreign policy at a very, very high level. Now, that's the interesting thing, is that basically the Heritage Foundation was set up by Paul Weyrich and the Coors brothers, but also with a huge amount of seed money from the Reverend Sun Myung Moon of the cult, the Unification Church, or the Moonies, as people perhaps know them. Now, what's not commonly known is that the Moonies were set up with money from the KCIA, and the KCIA are a conduit of the CIA. They're set up to basically be there to observe North Korea. This is not even sort of debated. This is just a fact. If the KCIA set up the Moonies, and the Moonies finance the Heritage Foundation, which they do to an incredible level, that means that the CIA are financing the Heritage Foundation. So this shows the connection. This is the deep state, the connection between the intelligence agencies, the government, the shadow government, and then the huge amount of controlling families and business interests that just so happen to basically own all these oil wells and petrochemical companies and other mass industry that is
pharmaceuticals
across the world.
Yeah, that's we're at 45 minutes, Neil. We covered a lot of territory. There's a lot more information in your book. That's one of the great aspects of the book, is I learned so much about it, and it's very detail oriented in all these different chapters. But is there anything else I missed, or anything you would like to end with?
No. That gives people the gist. I mean, basically, this is the thing. It's a very audacious mind control program that's rather multifaceted, and it's a bit convoluted and it's a bit complicated. But if you look at it, the evidence is there. That basically there is this device or these mechanisms whereby military psychological warfare is used against people by stealing their data in order to get them voting in a particular way. And they're creating these heroes out of people like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. And in the most bizarre Orwellian twist, they're setting these people up to be proponents of an anti-establishment idea, or to be a protest vote, or to be somebody that's going to take us away from, drain the swamp, as was the invented marketing campaign by Cambridge Analytica. And it's connected to a worldwide web of business conglomerates that have very, very strong ideas about immigration and homosexuality and abortion and workers' rights and women's rights. It's connected again to it's actually connected to what I would consider a cult that's called the family. But this again, some people might have seen in the Netflix documentary. But what the Netflix documentary doesn't tell you is that particular family was set up by Billy Graham, and with help by a gentleman called Jim DeMint. Billy Graham and Jim DeMint are both CNP. So the CNP is actually a higher and more secretive think tank. It's bizarre. So basically,
it's Christian dominionism, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Connected to Jim Dobson, connected to Jerry Falwell, was connected to Jimmy Swaggart and all those types of people and stuff like that. And it's frightening to see how much influence that these people have. And again, don't think I'm knocking Christianity anyway. These people have a very, very perverted take on Christianity, which essentially basically means that they can't do anything wrong. They are chosen by God, but they're imperfect vessels. Nobody is like deemed worthy to judge them, and they're on a mission. and they're basically allowed to sin as well. Apparently, like it's incredibly childish, and it basically is like, so what you've done is you've given yourself an out there so that you can do anything and get away with it and somehow justify it. It's very, very, very strange. And they have some incredibly strange bedfellows in this thing as well.
Yes,
Nazis, anti-Nazis, Zionists, anti-Zionists. It's such a bizarre setup, and I haven't even sort of begun to get to the bottom of it.
Well, no, it's interesting you use the title "Web of Populism" because it is a web, but I think it's pyramidal. You can go up from these kind of fake populists, fake independent reporters, and through their financing, it all leads back to a very select group of families and a select group of organizations that have a similar ideology, and they don't mind manipulating the general polity to fulfill their agenda and their goals, I think.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, perfectly put.
So,
exactly that.
Again, it's Neil Sanders. Mind Control is your website, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm also on Facebook. If people want to sort of have a chat with me on there, I'll usually get into a chat with people on there.
So it's NeilSanders, mindcontrol.com. And the book is available at the website, correct?
Yes. The book is. The other books are available on Amazon as well, and on Kindle and stuff like that. But this one, I've just did quite a small run on it, basically. So for the moment, it's just available at my website.
Well, it's a job well done. I really appreciate you writing that.
I
enjoyed to read it. So again, Neil Sanders, thank you so much.
No, thank you, William. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.